The crystal champagne flute slipped from my trembling fingers, and I watched in absolute horror as vintage Dom Perignon cascaded over the pristine white Hermes gown of Manhattan's undisputed social queen. Victoria Sterling's gasp could have stopped traffic on Fifth Avenue. "Are you kidding me right now?" I stammered frantically, reaching for napkins while trying to balance the silver tray of canapés that had already betrayed me once tonight. "I can pay for cleaning. I can cover it." Victoria's arctic blue eyes narrowed as she held her dripping designer dress away from her body. The charity gala at the Museum of Natural History had come to a complete standstill. 200 of New York's most powerful people turned to witness my spectacular downfall. "You'll pay for a $20,000 couture piece." Heat flooded my cheeks. $20,000. That was more than I'd make in 8 months working my 3 part-time jobs while finishing my culinary arts degree at Sullivan University. I'll find a way," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Victoria's laugh was pure ice. "With what, exactly?" "Your coffee shop wages?" She looked me up and down, like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. "This is precisely why we use established catering firms, not desperate students trying to pay rent." The whispers erupted immediately. Smartphones materialized from designer clutches, camera flashes popping like miniature fireworks. I could practically see the social media posts forming: "Gala fail," "Times Square disaster," "Waitress down." Security was already closing in 2 imposing men in navy suits who looked like they moonlighted as bodyguards for world leaders. "Miss, we need you to come with us," one said with professional courtesy that barely masked his impatience. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing the marble floor would open up and swallow me whole. My supervisor was going to terminate me on the spot, and that scholarship interview I'd been preparing for? Completely ruined. No culinary program wanted a student who couldn't serve beverages without creating a financial catastrophe. "Stop." The command sliced through the chaos like a blade through silk, deep, authoritative, carrying an unmistakable confidence that made everyone freeze mid-whisper. I opened my eyes slowly. Sweet mercy. The man approaching us belonged in a Renaissance painting. Tall, easily 6'3", with perfectly styled dark brown hair that looked effortlessly windswept despite the indoor setting. His black tuxedo was obviously custom-tailored, highlighting broad shoulders and a lean, athletic build. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch storm gray, intelligent, and currently fixed on me with an intensity that made my pulse stutter. More telling was how every person in the room watched him with a mixture of reverence, nervousness, and fascination. "Nathaniel." Victoria breathed, her fury instantly transforming into honeyed charm. "Thank goodness you're here. This individual has completely destroyed my gown. The insurance paperwork alone will be handled," he interrupted smoothly, not even glancing in Victoria's direction. His gray eyes remained locked on mine. "Are you injured?" The question caught me completely off guard. Of all the things he could have asked, genuine concern hadn't made my list. "What? Are you hurt?" He spoke with careful precision, as if I might not comprehend. "You appeared distressed." "I'm fine," I managed shakily. "Just completely humiliated." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Humiliated. Accurate assessment." "Nathaniel," Victoria interrupted, latching onto his arm with perfectly manicured fingers. "Surely you can't be serious. She ruined my entire evening." "It's champagne, Victoria, not battery acid." He gently but decisively removed her grip. "Your evening will survive." "But everyone witnessed it. The embarrassment alone." "Everyone witnessed an accident," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet power that made rooms fall silent. "Nothing more dramatic than that." He turned back to me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "What's your name?" "Sophia," I whispered. "Sophia Blake." "Well, Sophia Blake, would you care to join me for dinner?" The entire ballroom went dead silent. I'm fairly certain the string quartet missed a note. "I'm sorry." "What?" I squeaked. "Dinner. Food, conversation, typical human social interaction." Those gray eyes sparkled with barely contained amusement. "Unless you have pressing engagements elsewhere." I glanced around frantically. Victoria's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. The security guards looked thoroughly confused. Every single person in the room was staring at us like we were the evening's main entertainment. I'm working," I stammered weakly. "Not anymore." He gestured dismissively to the security team, who immediately stepped back. "Gentlemen, there seems to be some confusion. Miss Blake is here as my guest." "Your guest?" Victoria's voice could have shattered the museum's glass displays. "My guest," he confirmed with unshakable calm. "Actually, she's my date for this evening." If the room had been quiet before, now it was absolutely silent. Someone's champagne glass actually slipped from nerveless fingers. "I don't understand any of this," I breathed. "Simple choice," Nathaniel said, offering his arm with old-world elegance. "You can exit as the server who accidentally spilled champagne on Victoria Sterling, or you can leave as the woman who captured Nathaniel Cross's interest." Nathaniel Cross. My stomach dropped to somewhere around my knees. Nathaniel Cross, as in Cross Luxury Properties, as in the 35-year-old self-made billionaire who'd revolutionized high-end hospitality, as in one of the most influential men in America, period. And he was asking me, Sophia Blake from nowhere special Michigan, currently wearing a borrowed catering uniform and drowning in student debt, to be his date. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why not you?" he countered. But something calculating flickered in those storm-gray eyes, suggesting this spontaneous gesture wasn't quite as random as it appeared. I looked at Victoria, whose mouth was working soundlessly like a landed fish, at the security guards frozen in professional confusion, at the crowd of Manhattan's most powerful elite, all waiting to see my next move. Then, I looked at Nathaniel Cross, dangerous, gorgeous, extending a lifeline I couldn't begin to understand but desperately needed. I slipped my hand through his offered arm. "All right," I said, summoning every ounce of confidence I possessed. "Let's have dinner." His smile was slow and absolutely devastating. "Excellent decision, Sophia Blake." As he guided me toward the exit, I heard the explosion of excited whispers behind us, the frantic clicking of smartphone cameras, the sound of Victoria Sterling having what appeared to be a complete meltdown. But all I could focus on was the solid warmth of Nathaniel's arm beneath my palm and the terrifying certainty that my ordinary life had just taken an extraordinary turn. Whether that turn led somewhere wonderful or catastrophic remained to be seen. The private dining room on the 42nd floor of the Plaza Hotel was a study in understated opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, where the city lights twinkled like fallen stars against the dark canopy of trees. But I could barely appreciate the scenery because I was too busy trying not to have a complete panic attack. "You can relax," Nathaniel said, pulling out my chair with the kind of effortless courtesy that should have felt outdated but instead made my heart skip. "You look like you're planning an escape route. Can you blame me?" I smoothed down my simple black catering uniform, which felt completely inadequate in these surroundings. An hour ago I was serving appetizers. Now I'm having dinner with... I gestured vaguely at him. "With a man," he finished simply, settling into the chair across from me. Up close, without the crowd and chaos, he was even more devastating. The sharp line of his jaw, the way his shirt pulled subtly across his broad chest, the casual confidence in every movement. "A man who happens to own half of Manhattan's luxury real estate," I corrected, trying to inject some lightness into my voice. His laugh was rich and genuine. "Only half? My competitors are slacking." A server appeared, a real professional, not someone like me who'd clearly been hired as temporary help, and Nathaniel ordered wine with the kind of casual expertise that spoke of years navigating high-end establishments. When we were alone again, silence settled between us. "I still don't understand why you intervened," I said finally. "Defending me back there." Nathaniel leaned back, studying me with those unsettling gray eyes. "Don't you?" "Honestly, no. You don't know me from anyone. I'm nobody special. I'm just Sophia Blake, 24, culinary arts student at Sullivan University, working part-time with Premier Events to cover tuition." He delivered the information casually, like he was discussing the weather. I blinked hard. "How could you possibly?" "I know everyone who works my property, Sophia. Background verification is standard procedure." His expression softened slightly. What puzzles me is why someone with your obvious talent is serving canapés instead of creating them. My talent? I laughed, but it came out shaky. Did you miss the part where I just destroyed your guest designer gown with flying champagne? I saw someone juggling 3 jobs to pursue their dreams stumble because they were exhausted. There's a significant difference. The wine arrived, and he poured for both of us with practiced ease. Tell me about your cooking. The question caught me so off guard that I answered without thinking. I specialize in modern American cuisine with international influences. Not fusion exactly, everyone attempts that. I mean taking classic American comfort foods and elevating them using techniques I've learned from different culinary traditions, like Korean spiced fried chicken with buttermilk biscuits and kimchi slaw, or duck confit mac and cheese with truffle oil and crispy shallots. I found myself leaning forward, hands moving as I spoke. I believe food should tell stories, about where we come from and where we're going. What story would your cuisine tell? His genuine interest made my usual defensiveness crumble. The story of modern America, I suppose. We're all from somewhere else originally, bringing our traditions and adapting them to create something entirely new. It's complicated. The most interesting stories usually are. We talked through 4 courses that I barely tasted because I was too focused on trying to decode his motivations. Men like Nathaniel Cross didn't just rescue struggling servers and take them to dinner. There had to be an agenda. You're wondering what I want, he said, as if reading my thoughts, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. The thought had crossed my mind. Smart. Most people would simply be flattered by the attention. He stood, moving to the windows where Manhattan spread out below us like a glittering circuit board. I have a business proposition for you. There it was. I'm listening. I'm launching a new hotel, my flagship property in Chicago, scheduled to open in 6 months. He turned back to face me. I want you to be the executive chef. I actually laughed out loud. You're joking. I never joke about business, Sophia. I'm a student. I've never managed a kitchen, never even worked as a line cook in a real restaurant. You want to put me in charge of a flagship establishment? I want you to create something unprecedented. A menu that tells the story you just described. His eyes were laser-focused, intense. But there are conditions. Of course there are. What kind of conditions? You'd need to be ready in 4 months, not 6, which means leaving school and dedicating yourself entirely to this project. He moved closer, and I caught that intoxicating scent again, something expensive, woodsy, masculine, that made my stomach flip. And you'd need to convince the culinary world that you belong in that kitchen. How exactly would I do that? By convincing them that you belong with me. The words hung in the air like a challenge. My pulse hammered against my throat. I'm not sure I follow. A staged relationship, Sophia. For 4 months, you'd be Nathaniel Cross's girlfriend. You'd attend industry events, meet investors, charm the food critics who can make or break a restaurant before it opens. His smile was sharp as a blade. In return, you get your dream position, and I get... What do you get out of it? Relief from some rather persistent matchmaking attempts by my board of directors and a chef who'll be motivated to succeed because failure means losing everything. I stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. It was insane. Impossible. Everything I'd ever wanted, wrapped in a package that absolutely terrified me. Why me? I whispered. Because you fell tonight, Sophia, and you got back up. His fingers brushed my wrist just briefly, but the contact sent electricity through my entire nervous system. Because you have something to prove, and people with something to prove are dangerous in all the right ways. I thought about my mountain of student loans, my mother's medical bills from her cancer treatment that were still arriving monthly, my dream of someday opening my own restaurant. I thought about Victoria Sterling's cruel laughter and the way everyone had looked at me like I was disposable. I thought about the impossible storm-gray eyes watching me, waiting for an answer that would change the trajectory of my entire life. 4 months, I said finally. 4 months, and then I get the restaurant position. You get the opportunity to earn it. I extended my hand, trying to ignore how my fingers trembled slightly. Deal. His hand closed around mine, warm, strong, and final as a contract signature. Deal, he murmured. and I had the distinct sensation I'd just made a bargain with the most beautiful devil in Manhattan, a devastatingly charming devil who might just make all my dreams come true, or destroy me in the most spectacular way possible. "One more thing," I said, not releasing his hand. "I need to understand the rules. What exactly does being your girlfriend entail? Public appearances, industry events, convincing performances when cameras are present." His thumb traced across my knuckles, sending shivers up my arm. "Nothing you're not comfortable with. And privately? Privately, we're business partners with a mutually beneficial arrangement." But something in his eyes suggested it might not be quite that simple. "Can you handle that, Sophia Blake?" Looking into those mesmerizing gray eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand still holding mine, I realized I had absolutely no idea what I could handle anymore. But I was about to find out. "I can handle anything." I lied, with all the confidence I could muster. His smile was slow and devastating. "We'll see about that." And 3 days later, I stood in the middle of Nathaniel's penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, surrounded by shopping bags from stores I'd only ever seen in magazines, feeling like a fraud in my own skin. "The Armani needs adjusting at the waist," announced Charlotte, the personal stylist Nathaniel had hired, circling me like a predator while I stood frozen in a dress that cost more than my family's monthly grocery budget. "And we absolutely must address her posture. She carries herself like she's apologizing for existing." "I'm standing right here," I muttered under my breath. "Darling, executive chefs don't mumble. They command presence." Charlotte snapped her fingers sharply, shoulders back, chin elevated. "You're about to become America's most talked-about culinary talent. Act accordingly." Through the wall of windows I could see Central Park stretching out like a green oasis in the concrete jungle. The view was breathtaking, but I felt like I was suffocating. "She's not auditioning for Broadway, Charlotte," came Nathaniel's voice from the doorway. "She's a chef who needs to look professional, not win a Tony Award." I turned to find him leaning casually against the frame, having traded his formal attire for dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made him look unfairly approachable and devastatingly handsome. 3 days into this arrangement, and my breath still caught every time I saw him. "Easy for you to say," I shot back. "You were born into this world. Some of us are still learning the secret handshake. Rule number 1, he said, pushing off from the doorway and approaching with that fluid confidence of his. "Never diminish yourself. The moment you do, you've already lost the game." I wasn't. "You were." He stopped close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "You've been apologizing for taking up space since you walked in here, for needing help, for not being born with a trust fund, for having the audacity to accept an opportunity." His fingers touched my chin, tilting it up another degree. "Stop." The contact was brief, professional, but it sent heat racing through my veins. Everything about this man was dangerous. His looks, his power, the way he seemed to see through every defense I'd carefully constructed. "Better," Charlotte announced, apparently immune to the electricity crackling in the air. "Now, let's discuss your backstory." "My backstory?" "Every couple has an origin narrative, sweetheart. How you met, what drew you together, why you're perfect for each other." She pulled out a leather portfolio thick with notes. "The media will ask. And your answers need to be flawless and consistent." Nathaniel and I exchanged glances. In all our negotiations, we'd never discussed the actual mechanics of fake dating a billionaire. "We met at the hotel," I said slowly. "At the gala too, recent." "You need history." Charlotte frowned at her notes. "What about a secret romance? Star-crossed lovers from different social circles?" "No," Nathaniel said firmly. "Nothing secretive. Sophia isn't the type of woman you hide." Something warm bloomed in my chest at his words, even though I knew it was just part of the performance. "Then what's our story?" I asked. "We met 8 months ago when you catered a private dinner at my Midtown property," Nathaniel said, his voice taking on a storytelling rhythm. "You were covering for the head chef who'd had a family emergency. The meal was extraordinary, a perfect example of that modern American fusion you described." I blinked, surprised by how smoothly the fabrication flowed from him. "And then I spent 2 months trying to convince you to have dinner with me. You kept refusing because you thought I was just another wealthy playboy looking for entertainment." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "You weren't entirely wrong, of course, until you were. What changed?" The question came out softer than I'd intended. You did. His eyes held mine, and for a heartbeat I forgot this was all pretense. The first time you cooked for me personally, really cooked, not just that catering job, I knew I was in serious trouble. This is absolutely perfect. Charlotte clapped her hands together. Romantic but not saccharine. Class differences but not cliché. And it explains the accelerated timeline for Chicago. He's been planning this opportunity for months as a grand gesture. Is that what it is? I asked, still caught in Nathaniel's gaze. A grand gesture? What else could it be? He murmured. And I couldn't determine if he was still performing or if something genuine had crept into his voice. My phone buzzed, breaking the spell. A text from my roommate Jessica. Girl, are you seeing the news? There are photos of you and Nathaniel Cross everywhere. Great, I breathed, grabbing my phone with unsteady hands. Language, darling, Charlotte chided. But I was already scrolling through gossip websites. There we were, walking into the plaza's private dining room, his hand on my lower back, my face turned toward his, both of us looking completely absorbed in each other. Nathaniel Cross's mystery woman revealed. From server to socialite, the Cinderella story of Sophia Blake. Love at first sight. Hotel mogul spotted with rising culinary star. I stared at the photos, barely recognizing myself. Stunning, Nathaniel finished quietly. I was going to say terrified. That too. He took the phone from my hands, studying the images with a businesslike expression. But the narrative is working. Look at these headlines. They're not questioning authenticity. They're just trying to understand the timeline. Because we're convincing actors, I suggested weakly. Because chemistry can't be manufactured, Sophia. And whatever this is between us. He handed the phone back, his fingers brushing mine in the process. It translates. I wanted to argue, to point out that chemistry meant nothing, that this was purely a business transaction. But the words died in my throat because he was right. Whatever was happening between us, this magnetic pull, the way my pulse raced when he looked at me, the way his presence seemed to charge the air, wasn't something either of us was consciously creating, which made it infinitely more complicated. So what happens now? I asked. Now, Nathaniel said, adjusting his watch in a gesture I was beginning to recognize as his thinking tell, we go public properly. There's a culinary industry showcase tomorrow night at the James Beard House. Every important chef, critic, and restaurant investor on the East Coast will be there. My stomach plummeted. And by the end of the evening, everyone will believe that Nathaniel Cross is completely, utterly invested in Sophia Blake's success? His smile was slow and devastating. Trust me, sweetheart. The endearment rolled off his tongue like silk, and I felt heat flood my cheeks. This is going to be so much more challenging than I'd anticipated. One final matter, Charlotte announced, consulting her notes. We need to address your living situation. What's wrong with my living situation? You share a studio apartment in Queens with 2 roommates and a cat named Biscuit, Nathaniel said mildly. My girlfriend lives with me. Absolutely not. The refusal came out sharper than I'd intended. No way, Sophia. Fake dating is one thing, but I'm not moving in with you. I barely know who you really are. You know enough, he said, moving closer. You know I won't hurt you. You know I need this arrangement to succeed as much as you do. And you know that if we're going to convince anyone this is genuine, we need to be comfortable in shared spaces. He had a valid point, but the thought of cohabiting with Nathaniel Cross, of seeing him first thing in the morning and last thing at night, of pretending intimacy when every stolen glance already felt too real, made panic rise in my throat. I need my own space, I said finally. My own bedroom, my own bathroom, and boundaries. Lots of clearly defined boundaries. Done. His agreement was immediate, which should have been reassuring but somehow made me more nervous. And I'm keeping my cat. Naturally. I like cats, and my roommates can visit whenever they want. Of course. I frowned. This was proceeding too smoothly. Why are you being so reasonable? Because, he said, that devastating smile returning, I'm about to ask you to spend the next 4 months pretending to be madly in love with me in front of the entire culinary world. The least I can do is ensure you're comfortable while you're lying through your teeth. Despite everything, the absurdity of the situation, the impossibility of what we were attempting, the way my entire existence had been upended in less than a week, I found myself laughing. When you put it like that, I said, How can I refuse? You can't, he said simply, which is exactly why this is going to work. I hoped he was right, because tomorrow night we'd discover if two people could fake their way into love convincingly enough to fool an entire industry. The terrifying part was that I was beginning to suspect we might end up fooling ourselves in the process. The James Beard House stood like a culinary cathedral in Greenwich Village, its historic brownstone facade hiding one of the most influential dining rooms in America. Tonight it would host the East Coast Culinary Showcase, where the food industry's most powerful players would gather to network, judge, and make or break careers with a single conversation. I stood at the top of the front steps in a midnight blue silk dress that Charlotte had insisted made my eyes absolutely luminous, trying not to hyperventilate, while photographers captured every moment of our arrival. "Breathe," Nathaniel murmured beside me, devastating in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. "You look like you're about to bolt." "I might," I admitted through my practiced smile, waving at the crowd of food journalists and industry bloggers who'd materialized the moment our car pulled up. "This is insane. There are so many cameras. Ignore them." His hand settled on the small of my back, warm and steady through the thin fabric. The gesture looked casual to observers, but I could feel the strength in his fingers, anchoring me when I felt like I might float away from sheer panic. "Focus on me." That was becoming increasingly dangerous advice. Focusing on Nathaniel was like staring into a solar eclipse, mesmerizing, addictive, and potentially devastating to my well-being. Everything about him tonight radiated power and confidence, from his perfectly styled dark hair to the way he carried himself, like he owned not just the building but the entire neighborhood. "Mr. Cross." A reporter thrust a microphone toward us as we descended the steps with measured precision. "How does it feel to be supporting such a young, relatively unknown chef for your flagship Chicago property?" The question hit me like ice water. This was it, the moment of truth, where our carefully constructed story would either hold up under scrutiny or crumble spectacularly. I opened my mouth, pure terror rising in my throat, but Nathaniel stepped smoothly into the breach. "I think you're misunderstanding the dynamic here," he said with that easy charm that could convince world leaders to hand over their nuclear codes. "Sophia isn't some unknown quantity I'm taking a risk on. She's the most talented chef I've encountered in 15 years of hospitality, but surely her lack of executive experience is irrelevant when you possess her level of natural instinct and creativity," Nathaniel continued, his hands sliding possessively around my waist. "I've eaten at every Michelin-starred restaurant from New York to Tokyo. Sophia's food doesn't just satisfy hunger, it tells stories, creates memories, changes how you think about what cuisine can accomplish." The reporter's eyes lit up with the scent of a compelling narrative. "That's quite an endorsement. How did you first discover her talent?" 8 months ago, Nathaniel replied without missing a beat, turning to look at me with an expression so tender it made my chest tighten painfully. She was covering for another chef at a private dinner I was hosting. I took one bite of her roasted duck with cherry bourbon glaze and black garlic reduction, and I knew my life had just gotten infinitely more complicated. The way he was looking at me like I was something precious and rare and absolutely essential to his existence made my knees go weak. Every word of our fabricated story sounded completely authentic when delivered with that level of conviction. "Complicated how?" another reporter called out. "Because," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping to something more intimate, more real, "when you encounter something that extraordinary, you don't just want to taste it once, you want to understand it, nurture it, be part of its evolution." His thumb traced a small circle against my hip, sending electricity shooting through my nervous system. "You want to convince it to choose you back." The crowd of journalists had gone quiet, hanging on every word. Even I was mesmerized by his performance, and I knew it was all carefully orchestrated theater. Except, was it? The intensity in his gray eyes suggested something deeper than mere acting. "And did it?" I heard myself ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Choose you back?" His smile was slow and devastating. "What do you think, sweetheart?" The endearment sent heat flooding through my veins, and I realized with growing alarm that I was completely lost in his gaze, forgetting entirely that we had an audience. "I think," I managed, finding my voice in some semblance of composure, "that you're very persuasive when you want something. Only when it's worth fighting for, he murmured. And the way he said it made something deep in my chest crack open like an egg. The reporters erupted in excited chatter, smartphones capturing every moment of our exchange. I could practically see the headlines forming. Culinary power couple's love story. From kitchen to heart, a modern romance. Ladies and gentlemen, announced the James Beard House's event coordinator, appearing beside us with impeccable timing. If you'd like to continue inside, we have some incredible tastings prepared this evening. Nathaniel guided me through the entrance with practiced ease, but I could feel the change in him, a subtle shift in energy that suggested he was as affected by our performance as I was. The interior of the James Beard House was even more intimidating than the exterior. The historic brownstone had been converted into a shrine to American cuisine, with every room showcasing different aspects of the country's culinary evolution. Tonight the main dining room buzzed with conversation as America's most influential food personalities mingled over carefully crafted small plates and artisanal cocktails. Sophia. I turned to find Marcus Chen approaching one of the country's most respected food critics and a man whose reviews could transform unknown restaurants into reservation-impossible destinations overnight. Behind him walked Isabella Rodriguez, the James Beard award-winning chef who'd revolutionized modern Latin cuisine. Marcus, I managed, trying not to sound as starstruck as I felt. I've been hoping to meet you. Isabella and I were just discussing your proposed concept for Nathaniel's Chicago property, he said warmly, kissing both my cheeks in the European fashion. Groundbreaking doesn't begin to describe it. I blinked in surprise. How did you? Darling, this is the culinary world. Isabella laughed, her slight accent revealing her Puerto Rican roots. Word travels faster than wildfire, especially when it involves someone as high profile as your boyfriend here. She gestured toward Nathaniel with obvious approval. The question is whether you're prepared for the pressure, Marcus said seriously. What kind of pressure? The kind that comes with being the most scrutinized chef in America before you've even opened your doors, he replied. Half the industry is waiting to see if you're a legitimate talent or simply another pretty face with powerful connections. My stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. And what's your assessment? Honestly? Isabella studied me with sharp, intelligent dark eyes. I think anyone brave enough to attempt what you're proposing either possesses extraordinary skill or extraordinary delusions. Which category do you think I fall into? Both, she replied with a grin. Which is exactly what you'll need to survive what's coming. Before I could ask what she meant, our conversation was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of someone clearing their throat with dramatic emphasis. We turned to find Victoria Sterling approaching, resplendent in a crimson Oscar de la Renta gown that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Nathaniel, she purred, completely ignoring my existence. What a delightful surprise to see you here. The temperature in our little group seemed to drop several degrees. Victoria, Nathaniel replied with polite coolness, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly at my waist. I was just telling the Richardsons about that unfortunate incident at the museum gala. Victoria continued with false sweetness, her ice blue eyes finally acknowledging me with barely concealed disdain. Such a shame about my Hermé, though I suppose accidents do happen when one uses unconventional catering staff. The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to remind everyone present of my servant class origins and imply that my current position was purely circumstantial. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation, but before I could formulate a response, Nathaniel stepped forward slightly, creating a subtle but unmistakable barrier between Victoria and me. Actually, he said with deadly calm, that incident was the best thing that happened to me all year. Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. Excuse me? If Sophia hadn't been working that event, I might never have met her, Nathaniel continued, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made entire rooms fall silent. I'd still be attending tedious social functions, eating forgettable food, wondering why nothing seemed to satisfy me anymore. He turned to look at me, and the expression in his eyes made my breath catch in my throat. Instead, he said softly, I've found someone who reminds me every day that the most extraordinary things in life are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth everything you can give them. The sincerity in his voice was so perfect, so convincing that I felt tears prick behind my eyes. This was all performance, I reminded myself, desperately elaborate theater designed to sell our fabricated love story. So why did every word feel like a revelation? How romantic, Victoria managed weakly, clearly thrown off balance by Nathaniel's unexpected defense. It is, I said quietly, finding my voice and surprising myself with its steadiness. Every single day with him is romantic because he sees possibilities where other people see problems. He takes chances on dreams that everyone else calls impossible. I reached up to touch his face gently, feeling the slight roughness of his 5 o'clock shadow against my palm. He makes me believe I might actually deserve the faith he has in me. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Honest, raw, completely unscripted. They weren't part of our carefully constructed narrative. They were just true. Nathaniel's eyes darkened, something shifting in his expression that made my pulse stutter. "Sophia," he murmured, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't identify. "Well," Marcus Chen said after a moment of charged silence, "I think we have our answer about whether this is the real thing." Victoria made some excuse about needing to find her husband and retreated with as much dignity as she could muster. Isabella and Marcus tactfully drifted away, leaving Nathaniel and me standing alone in the middle of the crowded room, staring at each other like we were the only two people in existence. "That was—" Nathaniel started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair in the first genuinely uncertain gesture I'd seen from him. "Improvisation," I suggested weakly. "That's one word for it." He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, just as the silence was becoming unbearable, he spoke. "Dangerous," he said quietly. "I'd call it dangerous." Before I could ask what he meant, we were swept into the evening's main event, a series of tastings presented by up-and-coming chefs from across the country. We moved through the rooms like a perfectly synchronized dance, his hand never leaving the small of my back, both of us playing our roles with increasing skill. But something had fundamentally shifted between us. Every glance felt loaded with meaning. Every casual touch sent electricity through my nervous system. When he leaned close to whisper observations about the food or the other guests, I found myself focusing more on the warmth of his breath against my ear than on his actual words. "This is a problem," I murmured during a quiet moment when we'd stepped onto the building's small back garden for some air. "What's a problem?" "This," I gestured between us. "Whatever's happening here, it's making everything more complicated." "Is it?" He moved closer, and I found myself backed against the garden's brick wall. "Or is it making everything clearer?" "Clearer? How?" "You tell me, Sophia." His hands came up to frame my face, thumbs tracing along my cheekbones. "What did you mean when you said I make you believe you deserve the faith I have in you?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I meant that you see potential in me that I've never seen in myself. You're giving me opportunities I never dreamed possible. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "You're changing my life. And you're changing mine," he said quietly. "You make me remember what it feels like to want something I can't simply acquire, something that has to be earned, deserved, fought for." His thumb traced across my lower lip, and I felt like I might spontaneously combust. "You make me want to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me, Nathaniel." "I know this is supposed to be fake," he murmured, his face so close to mine that I could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "I know we agreed this was just business, but standing here looking at you, feeling the way you respond when I touch you." His forehead dropped to rest against mine. "I'm having a hard time remembering why that seemed like a good idea." My breath came in short, shallow gasps. "Because it's safer. Because when this is over we can walk away without anyone getting hurt." "And what if I don't want to walk away?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications that made my chest tight with panic and longing in equal measure. "You don't know what you're saying," I whispered. "Don't I? This is all an illusion. Nathaniel designer clothes in expensive restaurants and pretending to be someone I'm not. When the 4 months are over, I'll go back to being ordinary Sophia Blake from Michigan, and you'll go back to being a billionaire who could have any woman in the world. What if I only want this one?" he asked, his voice so soft I almost missed it. Before I could respond, before I could process what he was saying or what it meant or how it made me feel, the garden door opened and Charlotte appeared, looking slightly frazzled. "There you are. We need to get you back inside." Food and Wine wants to do a quick interview." And she stopped, taking in our proximity and the charged atmosphere. "Oh, am I interrupting something?" "No," I said quickly, stepping sideways to put some distance between Nathaniel and me. "We were just getting some air." "Right," Charlotte said slowly, clearly not buying it. "Well, airtime is over. You have admirers to charm and a reputation to establish." As we followed her back inside, Nathaniel caught my elbow gently. "This conversation isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes, it is," I replied, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. "We'll see about that, sweetheart." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions, interviews, and carefully staged photo opportunities. By the time we finally left the James Beard house, I was emotionally exhausted and thoroughly confused about what was real and what was performance. "That went well," Nathaniel said, as his driver navigated through late-night Manhattan traffic toward his penthouse. "Did it?" I stared out the window at the city lights, trying to process everything that had happened. "Better than well. By tomorrow morning, every culinary publication in the country will be talking about us. The narrative is officially established." "Good," I said quietly. "That's what we wanted." "Is it?" I turned to look at him, finding him watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "Isn't it?" I countered. "I'm beginning to think what I want and what I thought I wanted might be two very different things," he said softly. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't. We rode the rest of the way in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. But as the elevator carried us up to his penthouse, to the home I'd be sharing with him for the next 4 months, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. Because somewhere between the staged smiles and scripted responses, between the carefully choreographed touches and practiced endearments, something real had begun to bloom, something that could destroy us both if we weren't careful, something that might be worth the risk if we were brave enough to find out. Moving into Nathaniel's penthouse should have felt like stepping into a fairy tale. The sprawling Upper East Side apartment occupied the entire top floor of a pre-war building with soaring ceilings, original hardwood floors, and windows that offered breathtaking views of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline. Every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum or at the very least Architectural Digest. Instead, I felt like an imposter who'd accidentally wandered onto the wrong movie set. "Your room is down this hall," Nathaniel said, leading me through the main living area with my single suitcase and a pet carrier containing one very unhappy orange tabby. "Private bathroom, walk-in closet, and your own balcony overlooking the park. This is bigger than my entire apartment back in Queens," I murmured, taking in the guest suite that was more luxurious than any hotel room I'd ever seen. "Former apartment," he corrected gently. "This is your home now for the next 4 months." The reminder of our arrangement's temporary nature sent an unwelcome pang through my chest. "Right, 4 months." Biscuit chose that moment to voice his displeasure with a plaintive yowl from inside his carrier, and I knelt down to release him into his temporary kingdom. He emerged cautiously, orange fur standing on end, and immediately began exploring with the suspicious air of a cat who knew his world had been turned upside down. "He's beautiful," Nathaniel said, crouching down to offer his hand for inspection. "How old?" 3. I found him as a kitten outside the restaurant where I was working last year. Someone had just abandoned him. I watched as Biscuit, the little traitor, immediately began purring and rubbing against Nathaniel's fingers. Apparently he has excellent taste in men. Smart cat. Nathaniel's smile was warm and genuine. I had a cat growing up midnight. She ruled the house with an iron paw. Something about this glimpse into his childhood, the idea of a young Nathaniel being bossed around by a demanding feline, made him seem suddenly more human, more accessible. It was dangerous how easily he could disarm me with these small revelations. "I should let you get settled," he said, standing. "I have some calls to make for the Chicago project, but we should discuss logistics later. Tomorrow we have 3 interviews scheduled, and Thursday there's a tasting event in Brooklyn that—" "Nathaniel," I interrupted his efficient recitation of our upcoming obligations. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Last night in the garden, did you mean what you said about not wanting to walk away?" He was quiet for so long that I began to regret asking. Then he moved closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "What would you do if I said yes?" he asked quietly. My heart hammered against my ribs. I don't know. Then maybe we shouldn't find out. Not yet. His fingers brushed my cheek so gently I might have imagined it. Get some rest, Sophia. Tomorrow we start convincing the world that we're madly in love. And tonight? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Tonight we figure out how to live with each other without losing our minds, he said with a rueful smile. After he left, I spent an hour unpacking my meager belongings into the massive walk-in closet, where my clothes looked like refugees huddling in a corner of their palatial new home. Biscuit supervised from his perch on the king-size bed, having apparently decided that whatever this place was, the accommodations met his standards. I was hanging up the last of my dresses when my phone rang. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, and I realized I hadn't spoken to my former roommate since this entire surreal situation began. "Please tell me you haven't been kidnapped by a gorgeous billionaire cult," were her first words when I answered. "Hello to you too, Jess." "Sophie, I'm serious. Your face is literally on the cover of People magazine right now. The headline is, 'Love in the Kitchen, America's Hottest New Power Couple.' There are paparazzi camped outside our building trying to get quotes from your neighbors." I sank onto the bed, suddenly dizzy. People magazine? With a 6-page spread inside? Professional photos from last night at some fancy food place, quotes from celebrity chefs, the whole 9 yards. Jessica's voice carried a mixture of excitement and concern. "Babe, what the heck is going on? Last week you were complaining about your student loans, and now you're dating Nathaniel Cross?" I closed my eyes, trying to figure out how much I could tell her without breaking the confidentiality agreement I'd signed. "It's complicated." "Complicated how?" "Either you're dating him or you're not." "I'm dating him." "Since when?" "And don't you dare say it's been going on for months, because I live with you and I would have noticed if you were sneaking off to 5-star restaurants and charity galas." The lie sat heavy in my throat. Jessica had been my closest friend since freshman year at Sullivan. She'd held my hair back when I was sick, lent me money when I was broke, listened to me cry about my mother's cancer diagnosis. She deserved better than deception. "It happened fast," I said finally. "Really fast. I know how it looks. But nothing, Sophie. This is insane. You're living in his penthouse now. Moving in with someone you've known for what, a week? It's not like that. We have separate rooms, separate spaces. It's just practical with all the media attention." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "Are you safe? Because if this guy is pressuring you, I'm safe." I assured her, quickly. "Nathaniel isn't like that. He's been nothing but respectful. Respectful billionaires who sweep random women off their feet," Jessica muttered. "Right. Because that happens every day. Jess, I'm worried about you, okay? This whole thing feels like a fairy tale, and we both know how those usually end for the girl." Before I could respond, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. "I have to go," I said quickly, "but I'm fine. I promise. I'll call you tomorrow." "Sophie, wait." I hung up and opened the door to find Nathaniel standing in the hallway, having changed into dark jeans and a black sweater that made him look unfairly casual and devastatingly handsome. "Everything okay?" he asked, clearly having heard at least part of my conversation. "Just my former roommate checking in. Apparently we're on the cover of People magazine. Charlotte mentioned that. She says it's exactly the kind of coverage we wanted." He studied my expression. "You don't look happy about it." "It's just a lot. Lying to Jessica, seeing our faces everywhere, pretending what? That this is real. That I belong in your world. That I'm not just playing dress-up in someone else's life." Nathaniel leaned against the door frame, his expression serious. "What if I told you that you belong here more than anyone else I know? I'd say you're very good at making people feel special. And what if I said I'm not performing right now? That when it's just us, no cameras, no audience, I mean every word I say to you?" My breath caught in my throat. "Then I'd say that makes everything infinitely more complicated." "Maybe complicated isn't always bad," he said quietly. Before I could respond, Biscuit appeared between us, winding around Nathaniel's legs and purring like a tiny motor. The interruption broke some of the tension, and Nathaniel smiled. "I was going to make dinner," he said. "Are you hungry?" "You cook?" I asked, surprised. "I dabble. Nothing like your level of skill, but I can manage not to poison us." He scratched behind Biscuit's ears. "Unless you'd prefer to order in. There's an excellent Thai place that delivers." "No, I'd like to see what you can do in the kitchen." His smile turned slightly wicked. "Careful what you wish for, sweetheart." The kitchen was a chef's dream, professional-grade appliances, marble countertops, and enough space to comfortably feed a small army. I watched from the breakfast bar as Nathaniel moved around the space with surprising confidence, pulling ingredients from what appeared to be a very well-stocked refrigerator. "Pasta puttanesca," he announced, setting tomatoes, olives, and anchovies on the counter. "Fair warning, it's the only dish I've truly mastered." "Interesting choice," I observed, unable to hide my amusement. "Do you know what puttanesca means?" "Enlighten me." "It's Italian for, in the style of prostitutes. Legend says it was created by working girls in Naples because it was quick, cheap, and the strong flavors would attract customers from the street." Nathaniel paused in his chopping of garlic, one eyebrow raised. "Are you implying something about my cooking? Just that you have interesting subconscious food choices." He laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Noted. I'll try to pick something more respectable next time." "Don't you dare." "I love the honesty of puttanesca. It's bold, unapologetic, a little bit scandalous." I watched him heat olive oil in a pan, noting his technique with professional interest. "It says something about the person who chooses to make it." "What does it say?" "That they're not afraid to be provocative. That they understand sometimes the most interesting things come from unlikely combinations." "Is that your professional assessment, Chef Blake?" The way he said chef sent warmth flooding through my chest. "That's my professional assessment." We fell into comfortable conversation as he cooked, and I found myself relaxing for the first time since this whole arrangement began. Away from cameras and crowds, without the pressure of performance, Nathaniel was different, still confident, still magnetic, but with a dry sense of humor and genuine curiosity that made me forget he was one of the most powerful men in America. "Your turn," he said as we sat down to eat at his dining room table, which probably cost more than most people's cars. "Tell me something real about Sophia Blake. What do you want to know?" "Anything. Everything. Who were you before you walked into that gala?" I took a bite of his pasta, which was admittedly quite good, and considered how to answer. "I was nobody special," I said finally. "Scholarship kid from a small town in Michigan, working 3 jobs to pay for culinary school, sending money home to help with my mom's medical bills. I lived in a studio apartment with 2 roommates and a rescued cat. Dreamed about maybe opening my own place someday, and tried not to think too hard about how impossible that dream actually was. And now? Now I'm living in a penthouse wearing designer clothes, pretending to date a billionaire, and getting ready to run a flagship restaurant kitchen that I'm probably not qualified for." I met his gaze across the table. "Still, nobody special, just with better costumes." "You're wrong," he said quietly. "About which part?" "All of it. You were never nobody special, Sophia. Special doesn't come from money or connections or the right address. It comes from passion, talent, the willingness to work for what you want even when the odds are stacked against you." He reached across the table, his fingers covering mine. "You had all of that before you met me. Then why does it feel like I'm playing a part that doesn't fit?" "Because you're scared," he said simply. "Because someone believed in you enough to change your entire life, and that's terrifying." "Is that what you did? Change my life?" "I gave you an opportunity. You're the one changing your life by taking it." We finished dinner in comfortable silence, the city lights twinkling beyond the wall of windows like earthbound stars. It felt surreal, sitting in this beautiful space, eating homemade pasta with a man who could buy and sell small countries, discussing dreams and fears like we were old friends, rather than business partners in an elaborate deception. "Can I ask you something now?" I said as we cleared the dishes. "Fair's fair." "Why me? Really?" "Not the story you told the reporters or the explanation you gave Charlotte, the real reason you chose me for this arrangement." Nathaniel was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. He rinsed plates with mechanical precision, his movements careful and controlled. "Because," he said finally, not looking at me, "you reminded me of someone I used to be." "What do you mean?" "Hungry. Not for food, but for something more, something better, something worth fighting for." He shut off the water and turned to face me. "I built this empire because I was terrified of being ordinary, of settling for less than everything I could imagine. Somewhere along the way I forgot what that felt like. You reminded me, and that's worth risking my reputation on an untested chef. My reputation will survive. The question is whether you'll survive having it. Before I could ask what he meant, my phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. Early morning tomorrow. Car picks you up at 8 a.m. for Today's Show appearance. Wear the blue dress, it reads well on camera. Reality crashed back in like a cold wave. Work calls? Nathaniel asked, reading my expression. The Today Show wants us tomorrow morning. Are you ready for that? I thought about facing a national television audience, about answering questions about our relationship, about convincing millions of people that what we had was real when I wasn't even sure what it was myself. No, I said honestly, but I guess I better get ready fast. Hey, he moved closer, his hands settling gently on my shoulders. You're going to be incredible. Just remember, the best lies are mostly truth. Meaning? Meaning don't think about what you're supposed to feel. Think about what you actually feel and let that come through. The problem was, what I actually felt was becoming more complicated by the hour. Standing there in his kitchen, his hands warm on my shoulders, his gray eyes searching my face with an intensity that made my breath catch, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from freefall. Nathaniel, I whispered, not even sure what I wanted to say. I know, he said quietly. I feel it too. This is supposed to be fake. Is it? His thumbs traced small circles on my shoulders, sending electricity through my nervous system. Because it doesn't feel fake when you look at me like that. How am I looking at you? Like you're afraid of what might happen if you stop pretending this is all business. He was right. I was afraid, terrified, actually, because somewhere between the charity gala and the James Beard house, between designer dresses and puttanesca pasta, I'd started falling for the man who was supposed to be helping me fake a relationship. We can't, I said weakly. Can't what? Whatever this is, whatever's happening between us, it'll ruin everything. What if it makes everything better? Before I could answer, before I could think of all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, he leaned down and kissed me. It was supposed to be gentle, I think a soft exploration, a question rather than a statement. But the moment his lips touched mine, something ignited between us. 4 days of carefully maintained distance, of professional touches and calculated chemistry, exploded into something raw and honest, and absolutely devastating. I kissed him back without thinking, my hands fisting in his sweater as he pulled me closer. He tasted like wine and possibility, like all the things I'd been trying not to want. When his tongue traced the seam of my lips, I opened for him with a soft sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in my chest. This wasn't performance. This wasn't calculation. This was Nathaniel and Sophia alone in his kitchen, finally admitting what had been building between them since that first moment in the museum. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. That, Nathaniel said against my lips, was definitely not fake. No, I agreed shakily. It wasn't. So, where does that leave us? I looked up into his gray eyes, seeing my own confusion and desire reflected back at me, and realized I had no idea how to answer that question. I don't know, I whispered. Then we'll figure it out as we go, he said, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead. Together. Later, lying in my enormous bed with Biscuit purring on my chest, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had just happened. In less than a week, my entire life had been turned upside down. I was living with a man I barely knew but was rapidly falling for, preparing to lie to a national television audience about a relationship that was becoming more real by the hour, and getting ready to take on the biggest professional challenge of my life. Tomorrow millions of people would watch us on television and believe we were in love. The terrifying part was that they might not be wrong, but love and business were dangerous bedfellows, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to discover just how dangerous firsthand. Through the walls I could hear the faint sound of Nathaniel moving around his room, and I wondered if he was having trouble sleeping too. Wondered if he was replaying that kiss, analyzing every moment the way I was, wondered if he was as scared as I was about what we were walking into. My phone buzzed with one final text of the night, this one from an unknown number. Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame, sweetheart. Some of us know exactly who you really are. I stared at the message, my blood running cold. Someone out there knew something or thought they did. Someone who didn't want me to succeed. I should have shown the text to Nathaniel. Should have told him we might have a problem. Instead, I deleted it and tried to convince myself it was just a harmless crank message. But deep down I knew better. This fairy tale was too good to be true, and fairy tales always came with wolves. I just hoped I'd see mine coming before it was too late. The Today Show studios in Rockefeller Center buzzed with the controlled chaos of live television production. Even at 7 in the morning the energy was electric, producers rushing between sets, makeup artists wielding brushes like weapons, and the constant hum of equipment being tested and retested for the millions of viewers who would tune in across America. I sat in the green room, trying not to fidget with the sapphire blue dress Charlotte had selected, watching Nathaniel pace by the windows with his phone pressed to his ear. He'd been taking business calls since 5 a.m., his voice crisp and professional as he handled what sounded like a crisis with one of his Chicago properties. Even in the middle of our elaborate charade, his empire demanded attention. "The structural engineers are being overly cautious," he was saying, his free hand gesturing in sharp, precise movements. "If we delay the opening by another month, we lose the entire summer season. Find me another firm." Watching him work was mesmerizing and slightly intimidating. This was Nathaniel Cross in his natural element, commanding, decisive, absolutely in control. It reminded me exactly who I was dealing with, and exactly how far out of my league I really was. "Nervous?" asked a familiar voice behind me. I turned to find Charlotte settling into the chair beside mine, looking impeccably put together despite the early hour. She held 2 cups of coffee and extended one to me like a peace offering. Terrified, I admitted, accepting the caffeine gratefully. What if I say the wrong thing? What if they ask questions we haven't prepared for? Then you do what every successful person does on live television. Charlotte replied with a reassuring smile. You deflect, redirect, and charm your way through it. You've got this, Sophia. I've seen you with Nathaniel. The chemistry is undeniable. If only she knew how undeniable it had become. Last night's kiss had changed everything. I'd barely slept, replaying every moment, analyzing every sensation, trying to figure out how something that was supposed to be fake had become so devastatingly real. When I'd emerged from my room this morning, Nathaniel had been waiting with fresh coffee and warm croissants from some impossibly expensive French bakery, acting as if we hadn't crossed every professional boundary we'd established. But I'd caught him looking at me differently, like he was seeing something new, something that hadn't been there before. Or maybe something that had always been there but we'd both been too careful to acknowledge. 5 minutes, people, called a production assistant, clipboard in hand and headset crackling with instructions. Mr. Cross, Ms. Blake, we need you in makeup for final touch-ups. Nathaniel ended his call and moved toward us, with that fluid confidence I was beginning to recognize as one of his most dangerous weapons. In his perfectly tailored charcoal suit and silver tie, he looked like he'd stepped out of GQ magazine. How are we feeling? He asked, settling into the makeup chair beside mine. Like I might throw up on national television, I said honestly. That would certainly make us memorable, he replied with a slight smile, then grew more serious. Remember what we discussed last night. The best performances come from truth. Don't overthink it. The makeup artist, a tiny woman named Maria who wielded her brushes with surgical precision, began touching up my already flawless foundation while chattering about the unseasonably warm weather and her daughter's upcoming wedding. The familiar routine was oddly calming, even as my stomach continued doing gymnastics. You two are just the sweetest couple, Maria said, applying a final sweep of mascara to my lashes. I've been doing makeup here for 15 years, and I can always tell the real thing from the publicity stunts. You've got something special. Nathaniel caught my eye in the mirror, and I saw something flicker in his expression, surprise maybe, or recognition, as if Maria had just confirmed something he'd been wondering about himself. Thank you, I managed, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. Places. Everyone. The production assistant was back, more frantic now as the live broadcast approached. Mr. Cross. Ms. Blake, you're on in 60 seconds. The studio lights were blindingly bright, transforming the familiar Today Show set into something that looked more like an alien spaceship than a television studio. Savannah Guthrie sat across from us, looking poised and professional in a way that made my media training feel woefully inadequate. And we're back. Savannah said, looking directly into camera 2 with the kind of effortless charm that came from years of practice. I'm joined now by Nathaniel Cross, the billionaire hotel mogul behind Cross Luxury Properties, and his girlfriend, rising culinary star Sophia Blake. Thank you both for being here. Thanks for having us, Nathaniel replied smoothly, his hand finding mine on the couch between us. The contact was supposed to be for show, but the warmth of his fingers intertwined with mine sent electricity up my arm. Now, this is quite the modern love story, Savannah continued with a smile. Nathaniel, you're known for being intensely private about your personal life. What made you decide to go public with this relationship? I felt Nathaniel's thumb trace a small circle against my palm, a gesture that could have been nerves or comfort or simple performance. But when he spoke, his voice carried a sincerity that made my chest tight. Sometimes you meet someone who changes everything, he said, turning slightly to look at me. Someone who makes you realize that keeping your life private isn't worth missing out on sharing it with the right person. The way he looked at me when he said it, like I was the most fascinating thing he'd ever encountered, made my breath catch. This was supposed to be acting, but the intensity in his gray eyes felt completely genuine. That's beautiful, Savannah said, then turned to me with journalistic focus. Sophia, this has all happened very quickly. Some people are calling it a whirlwind romance. How do you respond to critics who say you're moving too fast? The question I'd been dreading. I could feel millions of viewers watching, waiting to see if I'd stumble, if I'd reveal the cracks in our carefully constructed story. I think, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, that when something is right, timing becomes irrelevant. I spent my whole life being cautious, taking safe choices, protecting myself from disappointment. I looked at Nathaniel, and the words that came out were more honest than anything in our scripted talking points. Nathaniel taught me that sometimes the most beautiful things happen when you stop being afraid and start being brave. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, recognition, something deeper that made my pulse stutter. Speaking of brave, Savannah continued, Nathaniel, you've given Sophia the executive chef position at your new flagship hotel in Chicago. That's quite a leap of faith for someone so young and relatively inexperienced. Experience is overrated, Nathaniel replied without hesitation. Vision, passion, the ability to create something entirely new, those can't be taught. Sophia has all of that and more. His hand tightened around mine. I'd rather bet on exceptional talent than safe mediocrity every single time. And Sophia, how do you handle the pressure? The critics who say you're only getting this opportunity because of your relationship. This was it, the moment that could define how the culinary world saw me going forward. I thought about Victoria Sterling's condescending smile, about the whispered conversations at the James Beard House, about every person who would always wonder if I'd earned my place or simply slept my way into it. Let them talk, I said, feeling a surge of confidence I hadn't expected. I've been underestimated my entire life because I'm young, because I'm a woman, because I come from a working-class background. People love to diminish what they don't understand. I looked directly into the camera, speaking to everyone who'd ever doubted me. But my food speaks for itself. When the Chicago restaurant opens, when people taste what I've created, the only conversation will be about the flavors on their plates. Everything else is just noise. Wow, Savannah said, clearly impressed. That's quite a statement. Nathaniel, she's got some fire there. She does, he agreed. And the pride in his voice sounded completely authentic. It's one of the things I love most about her. The word love hung in the air between us like a lit match. It was supposed to be part of our performance, just another line in our carefully rehearsed romance. But the way he said it, looking directly at me with those storm-gray eyes, made it feel like a confession. Well, I think it's safe to say America has fallen for both of you, Savannah concluded with a warm smile. Best of luck with the Chicago opening. We'll be watching. Thank you, we said in unison. And then the interview was over, the cameras cutting away to commercial as the studio lights dimmed. That was perfect, breathed Charlotte, appearing beside us with barely contained excitement. Absolutely perfect. Social media is already going crazy. Jack, Sophia, and Nathaniel is trending nationwide. But I barely heard her. I was too focused on the way Nathaniel was looking at me like he was seeing someone entirely new. That was... He started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. What? Not what I expected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected? I'm not sure yet. The ride back to his penthouse passed in thoughtful silence, both of us processing what had just happened. The interview had been a success, that much was clear from Charlotte's enthusiastic debriefing and the flood of positive social media responses already appearing on my phone. But something between us had shifted, some fundamental change in the dynamic that neither of us seemed quite ready to address. "Want some breakfast?" Nathaniel asked as we entered his apartment. "I could make." "We need to talk," I interrupted, setting down my purse with more force than necessary. He turned to face me fully, his expression guarded. About last night. About what just happened in that interview. About what the heck we're actually doing here. Sophia. No, let me finish. I moved to the center of his living room, needing the space to think clearly. This was supposed to be simple, a business arrangement. You get your fake girlfriend, I get my dream job, everybody wins. But somewhere along the way it stopped being fake, didn't it? He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with that intense gray gaze that made me feel exposed and protected at the same time. "Yes," he said finally. "It did." "When?" "Honestly? The moment you took my arm at the museum? Everything since then has just been me trying to convince myself I was still in control." The admission hit me like a physical blow. "And now I'm tired of pretending this is just business when every instinct I have tells me it's something else entirely." Before I could respond, my phone rang. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, and I almost ignored it before remembering I'd promised to call her back. "I should take this," I said apologetically. "Sophie." "Thank goodness," Jessica said the moment I answered. "I just watched your interview. You looked amazing. But there's something you need to know. Someone came by the apartment yesterday, a reporter asking questions about you." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of questions?" "Weird stuff about your family, your financial situation, whether you'd ever been involved with anyone wealthy before. She seemed to think there was more to this story than what you're telling people." The anonymous text from last night flashed through my mind. "Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame, sweetheart. Some of us know exactly who you really are." "What did you tell her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while Nathaniel watched me with growing concern. "Nothing, obviously. I told her to get lost." "But Sophie..." Jessica's voice dropped to a worried whisper. "She knew things about Mom's medical bills, about how much debt you're carrying, about that scholarship you applied for last year. This wasn't some random fishing expedition." "Did she give you her name?" "Victoria Morrison from Celebrity Insider magazine." "Sophie, what's going on? Is there something about this relationship you haven't told me?" I looked at Nathaniel, who had moved closer and was clearly catching enough of the conversation to understand we had a problem. "I have to go, Jess. But thank you for calling. And if anyone else comes around asking questions, I won't say anything, but be careful, okay? This whole thing is moving so fast. And if there are reporters digging around..." "I know. I'll be careful." I hung up and immediately turned to Nathaniel, who was already reaching for his own phone. "We have a problem," I said. "So I gathered. Victoria Morrison? You know her by reputation. She's a gossip journalist who specializes in exposing celebrity relationships. If she's sniffing around, it means someone tipped her off." "Tipped her off about what? That we're fake dating?" The panic was rising in my throat now. "If she publishes something..." "She won't publish anything without proof," Nathaniel said firmly. But I could see the concern in his expression. "Still, we need to be more careful. More convincing." "More convincing how?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. "What is it?" "Charlotte, there's a problem with the Chicago project. The city planning committee wants to meet with me personally tomorrow, or they're threatening to delay our permits by another 6 months. Can't you handle it remotely?" "Not this. I need to be there in person, charm the right people, make the right promises." He looked at me with something that might have been regret. "I have to fly to Chicago tonight." "For how long?" "At least a week, maybe longer if the situation is as bad as Charlotte thinks." The implications hit me immediately. A week apart, right when some reporter was digging into our relationship, right when we were supposed to be convincing the world we were madly in love. "That's going to look suspicious," I said. Couples who are crazy about each other don't spend a week apart right after going public. Then come with me. The suggestion caught me off guard. To Chicago? Why not? You could see the restaurant space. Start planning your menu, meet with the local suppliers. It makes perfect sense from a professional standpoint. And from a personal standpoint? I asked quietly. He moved closer, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, smell that intoxicating cologne that made my head spin. From a personal standpoint, he said quietly, I don't want to spend a week pretending I don't miss you. The honesty in his voice made my chest tight. Nathaniel, I know this is complicated. I know we agreed this was just business. But after last night, after this morning, he reached up to cup my face gently, his thumb tracing along my cheekbone. I can't pretend anymore that this is just an arrangement. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we should stop trying to figure out what's real and what's performance, and just see what happens when we stop fighting this. Before I could respond, before I could think of all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, he kissed me again. But this time it wasn't the desperate, hungry kiss from last night. This was something softer, more deliberate, like a question and an answer all at once. I melted into him without thinking, my hands fisting in his shirt as he pulled me closer. He tasted like coffee and possibility, like all the dreams I'd been afraid to want. When his tongue traced the seam of my lips, I opened for him with a soft sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in my soul. This was madness. This was supposed to be fake. This was going to complicate everything and potentially destroy the opportunity of a lifetime. I kissed him back anyway. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. So, Nathaniel said against my lips, Chicago? Chicago, I agreed, knowing I was probably making the biggest mistake of my life. But as he smiled, that slow, devastating smile that made my knees weak, I realized I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I was going to stop being careful and start being brave, even if it destroyed me. 3 hours later, I was throwing clothes into a suitcase while Biscuit supervised from his perch on my bed, clearly displeased with the sudden disruption to his routine. Charlotte had arranged for a pet sitter. Apparently billionaire boyfriends came with services for everything, and I was trying not to think about the fact that I was about to spend a week alone with Nathaniel in Chicago. A week of pretending to be in love while trying not to actually fall in love. A week of playing house while reporters potentially dug into every secret I'd ever kept. A week that could either make my career or destroy it entirely. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Hope you're enjoying the spotlight, sweetheart. Don't get too comfortable. Some fairy tales have very unhappy endings. This time I didn't delete it. This time I screenshot it and forwarded it to Nathaniel with a message. We definitely have a problem. His response came back immediately. Let them come. We'll handle it together. Together. The words sent warmth flooding through my chest even as fear clawed at my throat. Because whoever was threatening me clearly knew something, and I had a sinking feeling they weren't going to wait much longer to use it. But as I zipped up my suitcase and prepared to follow Nathaniel Cross to Chicago, I realized something had fundamentally changed. A week ago, I would have run at the first sign of trouble. I would have protected myself, taken the safe path, avoided the risk. Now looking at the screenshot of that threatening message, all I felt was anger. Someone was trying to destroy something beautiful before it even had a chance to bloom. Someone